the man who may know the most about President Trump's actions in the White House and the legality of them, is said to be cooperating extensively with special counsel Robert Mueller. The New York Times reporting today that White House counsel Don McGahn has given 3 voluntary interviews to investigators, totaling around 30 hours in all. And to help put that into perspective, a former Whitewater investigator told the New York Times that having access like this to a president's attorney would, quote, be like having the keys to the kingdom. CNN's Ryan Nobles is live near the president's golf resort in New Jersey, where he's spending the weekend. Ryan, this cooperation is incredibly unusual. So why is McGahn cooperating, and what could he know?
Well, there's a bunch of different reasons why Don McGahn is involved in this situation at the level that he is involved in it. But essentially, it started because Donald Trump's former criminal lawyers, those that were representing him in the special counsel probe, decided that it was a good idea for Don McGahn to voluntarily cooperate with the special counsel and not to invoke attorney-client privilege. But when that happened, according to the New York Times, McGahn and his own private lawyer decided that there was some concern that perhaps McGahn was being set up to perhaps become the fall guy for Donald Trump as it relates to the potential for obstruction of justice throughout the Mueller investigation. So that's why McGahn decided to fully cooperate and tell the facts as he knows them. And there are few people in the Trump White House that know as much about everything that's gone on over the past year and a half than Don McGahn. Here's just a list of some of the things that he has direct knowledge of. Of course, he was there and actually told Donald Trump that he would quit if the president made a move to fire the special counsel Robert Mueller. Also, in January of 2017, McGahn became aware of the possibility that Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor, had likely lied to the FBI. And he was also warned. It was Don McGahn that was warned by the Attorney General Jeff Sessions that if the president made a move to fire the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, that Jeff Sessions would likely resign. So Don McGahn in the middle of all of that. And of course, Don McGahn was there when the president made the very controversial decision to fire the FBI Director James Comey. Now, at this point, the president's legal team has not responded to this New York Times report. Sarah Sanders told the New York Times that they aren't concerned at all with these interviews that McGahn has given because they feel that the president has nothing to hide. But Rudy Giuliani did put out this tweet about an hour ago that doesn't specifically talk about the New York Times report, but Giuliani says this, quote, time for the Mueller investigation to file a report. We will release ours. Don't interfere with elections like Comey. The president had nothing to do with the Russians. He didn't obstruct an investigation. 1.4 million documents and 32 witnesses, no privilege raised. So there, the Giuliani, who's now become perhaps the chief spokesperson for the Trump legal team, making it clear that they want this investigation to wrap up. One more point I'll make, Anna, before I send it back to you, is that I've been in contact with someone that has direct knowledge of the McGahn legal strategy as it relates to all of this. And this person told me that they would not agree with the insinuation in the New York Times report that somehow Don McGahn was providing what they described as incriminating information about Donald Trump. They say that he was just telling the truth as he was required to do. So there's a lot of moving parts to this story, Anna, and of course, we're still waiting for the president himself to respond to what the New York Times is reporting. Anna?
Ryan Nobles, thanks for laying it out there for us. Does this idea of a White House counsel turned cooperating witness sound familiar to you? Maybe you're drawing parallels to Nixon's White House counsel, John Dean? Well, apparently McGahn did too. The New York Times writes, worried that Mr. Trump would ultimately blame him in the inquiry, Mr. McGahn told people he was determined to avoid the fate of the White House counsel for President Richard M. Nixon, John W. Dean, who was imprisoned in the Watergate scandal. Well, Mr. John Dean joins us now on the phone. And John, what's your reaction to all of this and this reporting that you were on McGahn's mind?
Well, I think McGahn is doing the right thing. Post-Watergate, they resolved a tricky question as to who is the client of the White House counsel. And they decided it is not the president himself, but rather the office of the president. So he is doing the right thing in representing the office of the president. And there can be conflicts between the incumbent and the office. Don did get wrong that I went to prison. I didn't. I was actually in the witness protection program for on and off from June of 1975 till January, 1973, June till January of 1975.
The New York Times, quoting a former Whitewater investigator, is saying that this is like having the keys to the kingdom. Is that how you see it?
Well, it certainly does give them a good guide as to where the problems may or may not be. As the clarifying remark that McGahn didn't in any way incriminate the president, we don't know if that's true or not. Probably McGahn doesn't know if it's true or not. He gave them the knowledge he had, which was would be invaluable to an investigator.
Could the president have stepped in and prevented McGahn from talking openly?
I think he could. He could do it on a couple of bases. First, there'd be the attorney-client privilege, which would cause the special counsel to have to test that and go to court and get it resolved. And there is no privilege for government attorneys, personal privilege like that. So that would be the one issue. The other, even probably a stronger basis, would be executive privilege, where the president can say that he doesn't want people who is helping him in his deliberation process and making his decisions testifying before other bodies like the Congress or the courts. That's what Nixon did with his tapes. He said they were subject to executive privilege. The court said, well, that's not true when a grand jury sends a subpoena for them.
I want to read you a quote, another one from the Times article about how McGahn and his lawyer feared McGahn was potentially being set up and came up with their plan. It says he, McGahn, and Mr. Burke, his lawyer, devised their own strategy to do as much as possible to cooperate with Mr. Mueller to demonstrate that Mr. McGahn did nothing wrong. John, what do you make of this idea that McGahn was worried about being thrown under the bus?
That's one I understand. That was what prompted me. I didn't talk to the media during Watergate or ever when I was in government. But when I had tried to get them to end the cover-up, and it was clear they weren't going to, but rather they were going to try to make me the scapegoat for the cover-up, and the former Attorney General John Mitchell the scapegoat for the bungled Watergate break-in, I dictated a brief comment that my secretary read to the Washington Post, the AP, and the New York Times to get the message through that I wasn't interested in being their scapegoat. So I can understand his thinking.
Do you think the president should be worried?
You know, the investigation, if it were as simple as Dowd and thought and explained initially the approach they were taking, it would have been over. But it is obviously much more complex. They didn't have all the facts. I'm not sure that Trump himself has all the facts. Some of his people may have been unwitting in their cooperation with the Russians. Some of them might have been unaware of even how they were helping or assisting. So this has to all be sorted out, and counterintelligence investigations are not simple. They often go on for years.
All right, John Dean, thank you very much. We appreciate your insight.